Hey, what's up everybody? Rob Marzullo here, Ram Studio Comics. Welcome back. So in today's video, we're going to be doing some art reviews. Before we get started, I just want to let you know I've got a new course out for how to draw faces from any angle, how to draw heads actually, and I break down a series of techniques for that. I'll make sure there's links in the description box below if you want to check that out. Just got to do my little promo there, and now we can get to the review. So this is our first ever review session, and I'm very excited about this. I'm actually very excited to say that, I couldn't believe how many submissions there were. So forgive me if you don't get selected. I can only pick 3 this particular time, but we'll get into more. You'll have other opportunities. So with that, let's jump on in. The first one here is by Fabian, and forgive me if I slaughter the names. This isn't really my strong suit, is not pronunciation, but I think that's Fabian's Lordius. Could be a surname or a screen name or whatever, but that's what I'm going to say. That's what he's calling himself. So this artwork, I selected this one because, I selected the 3 because I thought there was things that I could offer to each one of them. So it's not necessarily that they're great or they're bad or, they got pros and cons. Everybody's art does. But I felt that I could offer the most in the way of constructive criticism. We're also going to talk about why it's so important to allow constructive criticism to get into your mind and to affect your work, as long as it's done constructively. So basically with this one, I want to say first off, you're doing a really good job with interpreting anatomy. I mean, there's obviously some issues where it's not entirely correct, but you've got a flow to the anatomy, which is hard for people to grasp, and a lot of times they'll miss it entirely. So you actually have a lot of flow going on to the anatomy, and the way that anatomy works is it's like, like I've talked about it before on the channel here, it's like rope drawing. So if I convert this to a blue line, I'll just draw over top. So if we can see what I'm doing here a little bit more clearly. You've got this effect where the line work does, increase the brush size here, it does have a flow. You're flowing in and out of the muscle groups, which is great because that's kind of a hard thing for people to grasp, and they start to, everything becomes angular, and it's okay to have angular in your work, angular lines. In fact, I would probably recommend that you had a little bit more angular mixed in with this organic flow, but that comes with time. But you are doing some things right. Now, the thing that I'll say that I like most is probably the fact that you don't have an entirely static pose, although you could get a little bit more interesting with this pose by just making a few changes. So for instance, whenever you look at your pose and you've got these pivot points, right? These kind of alignments of the shoulder, the hips, and the head. And you could kind of see it like this, I guess. So although you have the head on a little bit different tilt, and you obviously have it in a perspective tilt like this, which is nice. The head is a bit small, but whatever. At least you're doing some, a tilt with the head, which is good. But you've got the shoulders and the hips almost on the same angle. The hips are a little bit more tilted, but you got to be very careful of that. And you can introduce a lot more of a dynamic feel to characters like this if you just arch that back just a little bit. So you could do something like this where the chest bows out just a little bit off to the side, and then I've got it kind of a lot of it, not a little bit, but whatever, just something like that where it shifts. It's off to the side a little bit more. You got to remember this waist can turn quite a bit, so we have to remember to tilt the hips or angle them differently, or face them differently, I should say, than we do the upper torso and the head. Now, if you go too far with it, it can look like just a very awkward and weird pose, obviously. But if you do it just right, you can get something that otherwise may look a touch boring and make it look more dynamic. I'm not saying this looks boring. You've actually done a pretty good job with the pose regardless. It's just, it could go a little bit further and you could really pull this out. Now, I do like that you're doing some foreshortening here. So you're just bringing that hand forward. You're overlapping the shapes, and you're getting a little bit of foreshortening out of the arms, which is great. The one thing I'll say, just pay attention to areas like this where it looks like what you've got here. You're doing something right where you're making sure not to draw the fist like this. That's what a lot of artists will do. There's their fist, right? But the thing that you got a little bit off is the thumb wouldn't be way back here. The best thing about hands is you can just look down at your own. When you make a fist, you'll notice the thumb doesn't go past the middle of your separation of the goodness, the two fingers. I couldn't get that out of there. But as you turn it, you do kind of have the right idea with perspective that it is going to look to move over more. It's just not going to go this far. So just a small thing, not a big deal, just pointing it out. But I do like what you did here with the finger. You made sure to bring this finger out and then back, which is very important because very rarely does anybody clench their fist and it's completely, well, it's never going to be completely blocky like this. You'll see a lot of people do this. They go, this is a fist, and and it just doesn't look right because it's just way too blocky and way too straight across. So you did the right thing there by bringing that one finger up. You'll see a lot of pro artists do that. Your proportions are a bit off, so that's probably the main thing I would say work upon. And whenever you struggle with proportions, remember that you can always use the 8 heads tall or whatever the head height of your character is. Just bring that off to the side and duplicate it. And even though this character isn't standing straight up and down, I'll do this real quick. And you don't have to use 8 heads tall, but you can use whatever, I like 8.5 actually for the dynamic hero-esque characters that I like to do. But this can be a guide, even though the character is off to the side like this in a more dynamic, interesting pose. You can draw the character standing next to this in a straight up and down static pose and utilize that for reference. In fact, I recommend that most characters, you do that, and you should have like this one predisposed straight on shot, side shot, male and female, that you kind of look at for reference. And you can use things like this, especially in digital art. It's easy to just grab it. I don't know if this was digital or traditional, but yeah, so you can do that and you can kind of check the work and go, okay, where's my proportions at? So yeah, I always recommend doing that. And maybe you would have found that the arm is a bit too small here. The head's a little bit small for the entirety of the body. Just things like that. But all in all, great job on the direction you're heading with the anatomy, the flow of it. Keep with that, maybe a little bit more angular lines and work on the proportions. But overall, good job. Okay, so now for this next one. This artwork's done by John McCarthy. It's Deathstroke, obviously, and great job on this piece of art. It's got a lot of strong points, like the pose is really strong, the style, the cleanliness of the line work. You can see if we zoom in there, besides the pixelation you get from JPEGs, it's a clean style. He's got some foreshortening with the arms. So pretty strong overall, good attitude to the pose and energy to the design of it. Everything, even that logo is that's really cool in the background. So kudos on that. If I had to point out anything, let me go ahead and just draw through this a little bit, show you what I see. I would say back to the proportions again, which, keep in mind, proportions are just they're very subjective anyways. You might have really liked your proportions just the way they are. Me personally, I probably would have did a few things differently. Just let me see if I can kind of illustrate it. So like with the leg, I generally will try to get a little bit more bend that you see from this part. The knee kind of comes in and back like this, and this part comes down, this part up higher, and you get a little bit more bend right here. You're pretty much there, but then I would probably, and again, this is personal preference, so that's why I always have a hard time really, digging in too deep on critiques with stuff like this, because this just may not be your particular style for doing this. But I would add a little bit larger foot. And I think that what happens there is it makes more sense to this powerful leg pose. He's got this kind of strong foot holding it in place. And then the other thing is this, it gives you another opportunity to make this foot a little bit larger than this one over here, so that you're pushing that, that foreshortening in another way. But I would probably, increase the size of the feet. That's just something I see. And then as far as the line weight, I think that maybe that's part of your style. So forgive me if that's if I'm misinterpreting this. But what I would do at any rate, even with a style like this, I would just make sure to make the line weight on something like this arm heavier than this back here. And so what I think of it like this is that if I'm staging the work, this would be one stage of the work right here. This would be another stage going back. This would actually be the same stage, but then this would be another one coming forward. So It's essentially this way to like, it's like you're piecing it together. And obviously with a character like this, you got a lot of segmentation, so it's not a big deal anyways. But what I would do is really get in the habit of beefing up the line weight on areas like this. Let's see here. So that gives you, again, another opportunity to push the depth in a scene like this. So your line weight for even this part right here can be a little bit heavier than what you see right there. And you can see just by that little bit of difference there that you're going to get some depth perception there. So that's just something else I would point out. I don't know if you really want that in this type of drawing because, again, it looks like it's that kind of animated TV show effect, and a lot of that is just the same line weight. But I'm just a big fan of line weight. And then likewise, if you did decide to do more rendering on something like this, let me actually convert this back and show you what I'm talking about. I'll actually just add a layer over top, convert it to a white, and then I will tone back the opacity. It'll make it a little bit easier to read what I'm trying to explain here. So one thing that I like to do, I'm a big fan of rendering. So again, this is going to go to a little bit more of a style choice. But I would probably take advantage of like some of these darker areas on the character and the segmentation. I do some some more rendering in those areas. So like what I mean by that, and you've already done it with your shading, but I would just kind of get in here and I would draw out like just shapes of shadows in here. I would show the segmentation a little bit like this, a bit like that. You can see you've already kind of illustrated it with the way you cell shaded it. So I'm sure it was probably your intention to not do this type of rendering. But again, this is just kind of showing the style that I'm a big fan of. So I like, render all this in, do some little cross hatching, maybe some glare lines. And I always think it's a cool opportunity to show the separation, basically. So when you have lighter areas like this yellow, you might just do like a little glare line or two here to show it's somewhat specular if it is. And then in the darker areas, like this area that was, I think it's a black on this character, you're going to do more rendering and fill that in. And it's going to help to show that separation. It's going to give you a little more variation in the design. And you can still select areas like this and color it if you're, you still want to go with that cel-shaded look that you're after. But yeah, this is just more of a style choice and something that I saw when looking at it. I thought, wow, I'd really render those areas out and maybe try to push another level of detail. But again, back to that style thing. This could just be totally contradictory to the style you're after, in which case, why am I explaining it? No, I just want to give you guys some different perceptions of what I see when I look at this stuff. But again, all in all, really strong piece. I mean, take this layer back off. That's just well done. So good job on that. Lastly, I would probably see the forearm there. I'd probably make that forearm a bit larger. The hand's about right, maybe a tad larger after you adjusted the forearm, but the forearm just seems a bit small. So really the only thing I could see is a little bit of that proportion aspect throughout the character. But all in all, great job. Keep it up. Okay, now this last one is from Zion Sims. I think that's the name. Pretty sure. I think Zil Manga is the character that he's illustrated here. First off, I'll say that I like a lot about this design. I like the proportions. I like the stylization, the anime, or I guess it's manga when it's drawn and it's anime when it's on TV, right? So the manga style of this character, I love the expression. I love the foreground element being more kind of the, animated kind of colorization. The background, I don't know if that's the background or that's something coming off the bunt of the sword, but I think it's the background, and it looks like a painterly effect there. So nice contrast, nice effect. Really well done, again. So, the thing that I would say most about this is that I would go for a little bit more of a cleaner line work. And the reason I say that is because it has this really nice style to it, and I think with clean lines this would really shine. I also think that I would use more line weight on an illustration like this. Now again, that could pertain to the style type and style choice that it is, but I've seen illustrations in this style with some good heavy line weight, and it can look really killer. I think that this one mainly though just needs clean line work. So what I would do there, Let me convert this to a blue, or actually I'll do it the other way. I think it reads a little bit better. I'm going to add a layer, turn that to white here, tone that back, and then I'll just draw through it a little bit and show you what I'm talking about. So with getting clean line work over top, there's a couple ways to look at this. Like a lot of people they'll go to draw their lines, and let me bump up the resolution too while we're at it. Where are you? Where are you, resolution? This is my resolution, my New Year's resolution. Yeah, Happy New Year's, everybody, by the way. So what I typically will do is I try to explain, making clean lines to people, and a lot of times they go, well, I just can't get my lines that clean. We've talked about this before on the channel, and I'm used to just kind of resketching the line over top. But I know a lot of people struggle with that, especially in the beginning. I gotta remember that I've been drawing for like 30 years or something, most of my life, and it's second nature in a lot of ways. But I'll tell you, one way to really get the hang of it, and I see a lot of artists do this, is just quick line making. So picture that you're going from this point to this point in one pass, okay? And you can see there's a bend there, so it's a little bit tricky to do it, but you just practice it, and you get it. And sometimes you gotta create two lines and then basically merge them together, or some artists get really good at drawing through the lines and then going back and editing the lines themselves. In fact, a lot of people will use this program I'm using, Manga Studio or Clip Studio Paint, because it has vectors and they can go back and re-edit the lines. But if you get in the habit of pulling these lines real quick like that, then you'll eliminate this kind of stutter step. It looks like you're kind of maybe doing this. You're trying to get the line real nice, but your hand's shaking a little bit. And I don't know, I'm just guessing, but something like that. And I don't know, but one way to get away with it, or it could be the bleed of the paper. This is if it started out traditionally. But again, even with traditional, because this is where I basically learned this, you start off and you just do these quick pulls. And I would just recommend maybe like a brush tip pen, so you can get these nice heavy lines with a little bit of taper at the end. And if you're working digitally, obviously you can create your own brush and come up with whatever. But yeah, that's a way to get a little bit nicer line. And then after you get better at it, I think you tend to maybe do this kind of feathering effect, or at least I do. I'm not sure if that's really the way. Tell you the truth, I think a lot of people, once they get really good at it, they use this method because it's quicker too. Once you get really good at knowing where the brush is going to end up when you're done, you start moving really fast. Even if you got to hit Command Z a couple times, you can see it's a pretty quick process, and you start getting these nice clean lines. You also get a nice sense of feeling to the line. It's not so boring like, when people try too hard, they get a overly flat line like that. You don't want that. You want a little bit of, curve in the line. You want a little bit of flow in there, some thick to thin. So this can be great for that. So take it as you will, but that's something I see there that I think would really clean up this art. And I would really just beef up some of those lines too. I know a lot of styles don't worry too much about line weight and line variation, but line variation can do a lot for an illustration. It can take an otherwise flat illustration and help it to propel off the page. You start to think about things and go, maybe if I made the lines around the ear just a little bit different than the lines around the hair, it gives you another level of separation. I don't know that you really need that, but I'm just saying that that's how you start to think about elements on the page, especially when it pertains to like a hand coming out off the page towards the viewer. You really use line weight to convey that, and it helps out tremendously. The other thing that I would mention is maybe trying a little bit more. I like how you're using line breaks, by the way. Those are important to do. A lot of artists, they connect every line. You're not doing that, so that's good. I would also recommend maybe a little bit more angular mixed with this. Let me pick the other brush I had there. So let me try with the clavicles here, or better known as the collarbones. I say clavicles when I'm trying to sound smart. But yeah, so if you get a little bit of angles in there, and I'd probably make these a bit smaller, but again, that's probably just a style choice as far as this goes. But so you might try putting a little back bend there, more of a straight angle here, and then a rounded shape there. So sometimes mixing in angles with your style can do a lot for it. So you're not basically lending to everything being overly rounded, which I think you got a little bit of that going on. You get some points with the hair, which is nice for that style. But yeah, I would probably try mixing a little bit of angular with even the anatomy at times. But, you know, again, that's just kind of a tip that I see in there. It's not necessarily entirely a needed thing. And then, yeah, it's really just that cleanliness of the lines. I think that if once you went through and did that, it's going to make a huge difference on the look of this. And then, you know, I would say some shapes of shadows, but again, I don't think that's really the style. That's really where I get tricked up, because it's like me personally, with the style that I do, I'm going to be in here and I'm going to be doing all these little, you know, shadow effects on the armor and trying to make it all, you know, textured out and render. I like rendering, you know, so that's just something I tend to do. But you know, I got to remember that a lot of times these different styles, that's not really what people are after. So yeah, so that's it. So essentially, I would try the added smooth lines and see what that does for you. But overall, great piece. I mean, you did a fantastic job on the design of the character. And yeah, awesome. So hopefully this has been informative for everybody. Now, the one thing that I do want to finish on, like I started with, I said, you know, you got to get used to taking that constructive criticism, right? And that's not always the easiest pill to swallow. But the thing is like this, if you get used to looking into the criticism and finding what you can to pull from it and move forward, your art is going to excel really fast. And the other thing is this, because you're not going to get offended by it, so you're not just going to shun it and forget about it. You're going to actually accept it and go, you know, man, they're right. You know, I really do need to focus on my proportions, or my characters are standing too upright. I really need to, you know, propel them out off the page. So you start to deliberately think about it more, accepting that, and then looking for reference that helps you to grow past that. So taking constructive criticism is very important. The other thing that you got to think about with that is that if you do get that dream job one day, drawing comics and working with whoever, then you're going to be able to deal with the editor. The editor is going to beat you down, or in my case, it was always storyboard agents and things like that, and you know, even commission jobs. I dealt with a few editors, but they were never that tough on me because they were smaller projects. You know, I didn't work for like Marvel, DC, where those editors, I'm sure, are pretty darn tough. You can watch videos by Todd McFarlane, and he tells some pretty funny stories about stuff like that. You know, I'm sure they all got their stories, you know, but he actually delves into it a good amount, which is pretty funny. He talks about his run on Spider-Man, things like that. So, but at any rate, hopefully this video has been informative for you. Hopefully you've enjoyed it. I know it's been a little bit long-winded. These will get shorter as I get used to doing these. This was my first ever art review, so it's probably a bit clunky. But I appreciate you tuning in and watching the channel. The support that you give me is fantastic. Really amazed with the growth of the channel, so thank you everybody for that. Make sure to comment below. Let everybody know what you thought of this, what you think of the artwork, and you know, what tips you might have for future review videos. I would love to hear it. So as always, keep drawing, keep having fun, and I will talk to you soon.